The Sethmar Story. Thanks for joining us again. Our conversation this week is with Dan Stalp of Sandler Training.
Well, thanks everyone for joining the podcast. My name is Brett Eckinger. I'm the director of wine, beer, and spirits here at Sethmar Transportation. And today I have a good friend with me named Dan Stalp of Sandler Training.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Dan, how's it going?
Going well. Real well.
So, Dan, why don't you introduce yourself to the crowd and tell us a little bit about Sandler?
You bet. I'm Dan Stalp, and I'm president of the Sandler Training office in Overland Park, Kansas. And for those of you that haven't heard of Sandler, we are professional development for sales and sales leaders. And typically we hear things like maybe that they're missing quotas, or they're actually getting quotas, but they're not at margin, or maybe that's just a little bit harder to get a hold of people these days. And so they're looking for us to give them a hand up and support them in being better at that craft.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so how did you first hear about Sandler and then get intrigued about becoming a franchisee?
You bet. So in 1995, I had just moved to Kansas City, and I had a different company that I was part owner in. It was an employee benefits brokerage, and I was out there and bringing in new business in a new market. And it was a little bit harder than I expected, and I ran into a Sandler trainer at a chamber event. And then I became a client, was a client for 10 years. And then in 2005, he approached me about potentially being his succession plan. And while I enjoyed the benefits industry, I just didn't see myself doing it till I was 65. So I was looking for that next thing. And then it just made sense to me that this could be something I could do because I'd been running parallel for 10 years. You know, I'd already knew the system and knew it worked, and was a believer. So I left my benefits company and I joined him in 2005, and I've been doing it ever since.
Nice. Awesome. Well, and I know the 7 steps to the Sandler since I've been in it for several years now. Yep. But could you kind of run through the 7 steps and also maybe give a brief description of what those steps are and what they mean?
You bet. So Sandler is based on 7 steps, and then for the most part, they're in order, but you could also think about 3 main areas that these 7 steps fit into. So the first one is just that connecting with people. And most people, when they attempt to connect with somebody, they go the news, weather, and sports route. But we've got a couple of different, what I would call subconscious ways to connect there. And then we move into qualify, or maybe another way to look at it is to disqualify status. And this is 3 steps that we would do before we would actually do a proposal, presentation, demo, fill in the blank. And then the last 2 are about the actual closing part. But the first 2 are bonding and rapport and upfront contracts. And those 2 are both about the relationship, but we come at it different ways. Bonding rapport is going to be the subconscious way to connect. How do people learn? Are they fast-paced, slow-paced? Are they task-oriented, people-oriented? Are they verbal learners, auditory learners, visual learners? And so being able to connect with somebody on that level rather than the typical, because when you start talking about stuff on their walls and stuff on their desk and, trying to make small talk, they just see that as all the same. Yeah. And then the other part of that is what we call upfront contracts. And that's where we basically talk up front about what we're going to accomplish during a phone call, during a meeting, during whatever, so that there aren't any surprises. So as you can see, those would both be a way to bond. The 3 qualifiers are going to be, are they moving towards something or away from something? We call it pain. Is that something, that they're really willing to do something about, or is it just curiosity? So we want to find out that. Are they willing to spend time, money, and resources to get it? And then what's their decision process? So those 3 are the 3 qualifier disqualifiers. And the last one is now we're ready to do a proposal, which would be step 6. And step 7 is just to double check that they feel comfortable with what they're about to purchase.
Absolutely. And now you mentioned in there the disqualify part. And I know Sandler's really big on getting to the no first. Let's qualify first. Can you talk about the cognitive dissonance that people struggle with in applying that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, taking someone as a sales professional, taking somebody to know is counterintuitive. Yeah. So even though on some level someone might say, well, that makes sense, that you wouldn't want to waste time with somebody. It's really hard to get people to not only attempt to do that, but more importantly, to master that. So that's where that cognitive dissonance comes in. It's like, well, I'm supposed to sell something. So why would I, why would I help them to know? Well, it's because if they're not going to buy, when do you want to know that they're not going to buy? Today, tomorrow, 2 weeks, 2 years. So really what it does is it saves everybody time. And when you're not putting pressure on somebody, which if we're trying to get them to do something, like, yes, there's usually pressure, we get more of the truth. And so if we have more of the truth, both parties can, make better decisions on where to spend their time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess in your opinion, what would you think would be the hardest sales tactic within the Sandler training for somebody to learn?
Yeah, well, it's kind of in that same vein of, helping people to know, because normally when you think about like in your business, you have a lot of competitors, but you also have the competitor of them doing nothing, just staying put. Yeah. And then there's other businesses such as mine is my biggest competitor is not another company. It's apathy. They're just going to keep kicking the can like they've always kicked the can, and nothing's going to change. So one of the techniques that seems to be really hard for people to get is what we call negative reverse selling. And it's basically getting the truth. So if I take that pressure off of you and I don't assume that you like everything I like, or don't assume that you care about what I care about, then there's not any pressure there. And so then what the client or prospect can do is say, I don't know about that. I think I do want that. Or, yeah, I don't want that. And I appreciate you recognizing that. So it's a really powerful technique, but it's so counterintuitive. It just takes time for people to, again, just master it.
And it works in the office and outside the office. That one specifically does.
Yes, it does. Kids, spouses. Just take, nobody likes to have pressure put on them. So if you can alleviate the pressure, they like that. They're more likely to tell you the truth. They appreciate your candor and your transparency. So it's all good. Absolutely.
So what do you see as one of the largest confidence gaps in young salespeople?
It'd be awesome if we could just say it's young salespeople, but there are some that are more indicative than, say, someone who's been doing it 20 years. But I hate to turn this into what do they call that? The generation gap or whatever. But I think it's in general taking action. There's a variety of reasons why people don't take action. It could be that they just don't feel like they have enough research. It could be that they're so worried about someone who might get, bent out of shape, but they don't know that. And then the other one is just that they're just not very organized to take action. So those are really the three, what I would call bullies to taking action. So because the reality of it is, instead of you knowing what you need to do before you do it, which tends to procrastinate, we're of the belief, what can you do now to move towards that? You don't have to do the whole thing, but the cool part is you're actually learning something along the way. If I take action and I get a certain outcome, good, bad, or indifferent, I know more than I did before I took action. So just to be able to break things down into more, bite-sized pieces, that there's always something that we can be doing, whether that's prospecting, whether that's attempting to call a client, whether that's, saying things like, I don't know the answer to that, but I can get the answer to that. And so let's just keep moving on, instead of me acting like I know and it's not, and it's wrong, or them, whatever. So there's just a lot of little things that we can do to keep moving things along.
Absolutely. And it's to me, it's a lot about the controllables. You mentioned prospecting. What can I do? Well, the only thing we can do is picking up the phone and calling, making sure we're trying to get those touch points with people.
Yep. Another competency that tends to be a little more prevalent in a younger person, it doesn't have to be, just a younger salesperson, is accepting responsibility. I mean, if you think about the average 16-year-old, their parents don't know anything, they know everything, but they don't have enough life experience to really, so there's just a lot of what I would call blaming that goes on, with a teenager. And if someone's 26 and in a sales role, That just 10 years ago, they were just a snot-nosed little teenager. So they haven't had as much time to work on that, but if someone's 50 or 45, life has probably taught them that they need to take responsibility. And so that's another competency that's sometimes more likely to be missing. When we do assessments, if I see a lower accepts responsibility on a 26-year-old versus a 46-year-old, I give the 26-year-old a little more grace than I would a 46-year-old.
Yeah. And so to build on that, then you had mentioned the assessment. So can you talk a little bit about, because that's part of Sandler as well.
Yeah. So, obviously people hire us to get results, and we want to be hired to give results. And the easiest way I can explain this, but if you've inadvertently hired 3 zebras and they're supposed to do giraffe work, training and coaching them is only going to help so much. That neck is just never going to be long enough. So what we're looking for, are people that are more apt to succeed in the role. And then it's funny, the people who need the training the least want it the most, and the people who need it the most want it the least. I mean, I'm going through something right now with somebody, and, I'm just like, everybody sees the gap but them. Yeah. It's just this huge gap, and they don't see it. And so, but yeah, do they need it? Yeah, but if they don't think they need it, sometimes it just doesn't make sense to move forward, because it's just arm wrestling. And so, but the reality of it is, if you can start with someone who has momentum in a lot of these competencies, then when you throw training and coaching and developing on top of that, it's like putting gasoline on fire. It just takes off. But if they don't have that and you throw gasoline on it, you just get wet pavement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Well, can we talk a little bit about sales funnels?
Sure.
So I'm going to hit you with a couple questions at once, and you can just answer them in that order. The first one is, do you see them vary by tenure and by industry? Secondly, how big is too big on your sales funnel? And the third one is your recommendation or personal perception on how many touches somebody should put on a prospect or whatever inside that sales funnel.
Mm-hmm. No, those are all really good. Why don't we start with the funnel, just because there were several questions around that. It does depend on your sales cycle, like how long your sales cycle is. But for most of our, unless you're in what we call the consultative, where it's like 5 or more actual meetings before closure, or particularly a yes. But that's a smaller group of people. So let's talk about the other ones where there's more of them. Even though we've been talking about, abundance and thinking outside the box and all that jazz, when it comes to a pipeline, one way to do kind of a pattern interrupt is to say, what if you only have so much land? Let's just say there's this much land, and you can only fit so many people on that pipeline. So in some ways, we're going to have you do the opposite of what you think. A lot of people say, well, if I have 30, that's awesome. If I have 50 on my pipeline, that's better. And that's not the truth. It's usually just a bunch of people that shouldn't be on there. So let's just say it's only this big, and you can fit 8 on there. That's all there's room for. I grew up on a farm. You can only plant so many rows of crops on an acre. You can't if you throw too much on there, it doesn't grow. So there's just something about having, and so if you had 8, then what it does is it helps you qualify or disqualify quicker. So let's say I already had 8 on there, and then I get this hot prospect, and I go, ooh, I've already got 8. Well, 2 things need to happen. You don't have room for 9. You either have to, really convince yourself why that should be on there, or does it need to wait? Or who are one of the other 8s that maybe shouldn't be on there? And what it does is it allows you to focus. It allows you to be more objective. And it also doesn't lull you into sleep when you see 30 people on your pipeline and you think you're just kicking butt and taking names. And the reality of it is most of those shouldn't be on there. And then you're not prospecting them because you have all these people on your pipeline that aren't going anywhere. You see, it's just this like race to nowhere. So by limiting it, you just become more objective about qualifying. I'm going to qualify this one. Is it really ready to be on this piece of land? Or I'm going to say, it is, but I'm taking ABC off. I'm gonna disqualify them. They shouldn't be on there anymore. So now when you get into longer selling cycles, I think you can those tend to have a few more on them because the selling cycle is so long. To get to closure takes longer. But after you get, like we have some clients that have 18-month sales cycle, and that's not head trash. I mean, they sell software to higher education. It's just, there's just no way, you can't really speed that up from 18 months to 2 months. It could happen. So we allow them a little more grace just because the sales cycle is longer. But even there, maybe 12, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, if it doesn't have at least a 60% chance, we suggest don't even put it on there. Just put a reminder in your CRM to call them at some point, but they shouldn't be on a pipeline.
Gotcha. And so, how many touches within one prospect would you kind of recommend somebody go? I know we talk about in class about finding your number, and you work your way through that as you process through everything. But in your general idea, where do you think somebody should kind of start at?
Yeah. So, what's tricky is there's so many different mediums to contact somebody. I can do a Facebook Messenger. I can do LinkedIn messaging. I can do a text. I can do mail, email. It's just all these different things. And so, you would think with all those different mediums, it'd be easier than ever to get a hold of somebody, but yet it makes it harder.
Yeah.
But in general, we're of the belief is to just do things in threes. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a cadence of 3. So maybe you do a voicemail, then you do an email, and if they still haven't responded to you, then you do what's called a breakup. Just for that period of time. So we did 3 touches. It could be in 2 weeks. It could be in 5 days or whatever.
Yeah.
And then if they don't respond to the break, and I'll explain what that is in a second. If they don't respond to the breakup, then give it a 3-month rest and then do it again 3 times. So it's just threes, instead of, every week, call this person, email them, and you're getting into the teens and then you're getting into the 20s and, but gosh, one of these days I'm going to pick up. But when you do that, they just say there's no sense of urgency because they just know you're just going to keep calling. They'll get to you when they get to you. But the breakup is basically, I sent an email, left a voicemail, haven't heard back, get the feeling this is of zero interest to you. So this will be my last reach out to you on this topic or this project or whatever. If I've missed something, here's my number, and then we can talk about it. And what we found is the first and the third tend to get the best responses.
Okay.
I wouldn't eliminate the second because just leaving one voicemail and saying that is kind of like, it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And then you just, I'd send a reminder, like if they haven't contacted me in 2 weeks, see if what am I doing that for? I'm just going to put it out for 3 months. And then if they call me, great, but most of them don't. Maybe 15, 20% respond back. Yeah. So that just allows, you to have breaks, and it also allows you to put some new people into your prospecting pipeline.
Okay.
In the meantime. Yep.
Gotcha.
So awesome. Just, 3 though, boom, boom, boom. Nothing happens, 3-month rest, do it again. They don't even remember you did it the first time, most of them.
Nice. Well, before we leave, I had one last question for you.
Sure.
And it is, if you were going to give advice to a young salesperson coming out of college or whatnot, or just jumping into being a salesperson, what would the first thing that you would tell them to do?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people, he's going to say, get him into sales training and get him into sales coaching. That's actually not going to be my answer. We have some clients that's just their deal. If they have someone come in, they're 22 years old, they put them in the training because they have a common playbook, Sandler playbook throughout the whole company. But in general, I wouldn't, if it was just someone who was going to invest in themselves, I would suggest they wait. Because there's just a lot of stuff that we talk about, a lot of tactics, and if you haven't experienced it, you just don't connect to it. You're not going to modify your behavior because it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
So what I would suggest is just go in and just, skin your knee, get up and do it again, because then you at least, and as long as you're learning something, there's nothing wrong with someone hanging up on you. There's nothing wrong with someone, first time using you for information, you discover later they were never going to, but as long as you're learning something. So that's the main thing is, every time something doesn't turn out the way you hoped, just ask yourself this question. Well, okay, I don't like that, but what, if anything, could I have done differently to either have found that out sooner, not had that happen, not wasted time? Because what's happening there is you're accepting responsibility. You're not just blaming the prospect or economic conditions or, whatever. There's so many things you can blame in sales. You're saying it just is. But I can, there are things that I've learned and that I would do differently next time. And then, but the other part of that is to, if you're in a company with other people, interview them because they know your product, they know your service, and ask them things like, if you had to do over again, what would you have done differently? Learn from others' mistakes rather than all your own. And then once you start getting momentum, then throw training and coaching on it.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Well, I appreciate it.
You bet. I appreciate it too. This is fun.
Yeah. Glad we got the chance to connect, and hopefully you have safe travels back, and we'll catch you in class here next week.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks, Dan.
Great job.